Dear friends, subscribe and hit the bell. Your support allows us to continue our investigations. The Temple of Baal Hammon was engulfed in thick clouds of incense, creating an atmosphere of mystery and hidden menace that permeated the very heart of the 9-year-old boy. Shadows from torches danced on the stone walls, as if foretelling the coming storms that would shake the foundations of the known world. The father, the mighty general Hannibal Barca, stood before the altar like a granite cliff, his face stern, his eyes burning with a fire that could not be extinguished by water or time. He had brought his son here not for an idle stroll, but for a sacred ritual that was to determine the fate not only of one family, but of entire civilizations. The air was heavy, saturated with the aromas of myrrh and burning sacrificial meat. The sounds of footsteps echoed from the high vaults, creating a sense of the presence of ancient deities. Hamilcar took his son's small hand and brought it to the fire, demanding that he utter words that would forever change the course of history. The boy, feeling the heat of the flame and the weight of his father's gaze, pronounced an oath that became his life's creed, his curse, and his greatest motivator. He swore never to be a friend to Rome, to dedicate every breath, every thought, and every action to fighting the eternal enemy of his homeland. It was not just a child's promise. It was a contract with fate, signed in the presence of the gods and sealed by the indomitable will of the Barcid lineage. At that moment, 2,247 years ago, the world did not yet know that this oath would become the catalyst for one of the most grandiose and tragic epics in human history. Carthage, the jewel of the Mediterranean, was still licking its wounds after the humiliating defeat in the First Punic War. The proud maritime power had been deprived of its fleet, its possessions in Sicily and Sardinia, and was forced to pay Rome colossal indemnities that drained the treasury and stifled the economy. The Roman Republic, young and aggressive, seemed an unstoppable predator, ready to devour everything in its path. But deep within humiliated Carthage, resistance was brewing that refused to accept the role of victim. Hamilcar Barca, understanding that the sea was lost, turned his gaze to the land, to the rich and wild lands of Iberia, where a new base, a new army, and a new springboard for revanche could be created. It was there, among the rugged mountains and silver mines of Spain, that young Hannibal mastered the art of war, learning not from books, but on the battlefield, absorbing strategy and tactics along with the dust of campaigns and the clang of swords. He grew up in a military camp where weapons were his toys and battle-hardened veterans his mentors. He learned to sleep on hard ground covered only by a cloak, to share meager food with common soldiers, and to endure hardships that would have broken anyone else. This upbringing forged him into a leader whom soldiers idolized, seeing in him not just a commander, but one of their own, first among equals. Hannibal possessed a unique mind, capable of grasping the entire picture of a battle, anticipating enemy moves, and finding unconventional solutions where others saw only a dead end. He studied the languages, history, and psychology of his enemies, understanding that war was fought not only with swords, but also with minds. When his father passed away and then his brother-in-law Hasdrubal completed his earthly journey, command of the army passed to the 26-year-old Hannibal. The army met this appointment with unanimous approval, seeing in the young Barcid a living embodiment of his father's spirit and genius. Now, with power and resources, he could proceed with fulfilling his oath, with implementing a plan that seemed madness to any sane strategist of that time. Rome believed itself safe, protected by seas and a powerful fleet, confident that Carthage would never dare a direct invasion. The Romans expected war in Spain or Africa, but never on their own soil. Hannibal, however, conceived the impossible. He decided to strike at the very heart of the enemy, traveling thousands of kilometers overland, overcoming impregnable mountains and hostile territories. This was a challenge not only to Rome, but to nature itself, to logic and common sense. His plan was based on surprise, on speed, and on an audacity that bordered on recklessness. He understood that Rome had inexhaustible human resources, and the only way to win was to defeat the Roman legions on their own territory, win over Rome's Italian allies, and destroy the very structure of Roman statehood. This was a strategy not merely of conquest, but of deconstructing the enemy empire from within. The assembly of the army in New Carthage resembled preparations for the end of the world. Mercenaries flocked here from all corners of the oikumene. Fierce Numidian horsemen who rode horses without bridles, heavy infantry from Libya, battle-hardened Iberians, and Balearic slingers, capable of hitting a bird's eye with a stone in flight. It was a motley, multilingual army, united only by the iron will of one man. Hannibal knew how to manage this chaos, how to transform a diverse crowd into a single, deadly mechanism. He addressed each people in their own language, knew the customs and beliefs of his soldiers, and knew how to inspire them and make them believe in the impossible. A journey of thousands of kilometers awaited them, across the Pyrenees, across the mighty Rhone, and finally, across the Alps. A barrier considered insurmountable for a large army, especially with war elephants. These giant beasts, inspiring terror in enemies, were not just weapons, but a symbol of Carthage's might. Living tanks of antiquity, whose roar could put entire legions to flight. The crossing of the Pyrenees was merely a warm-up, a test of endurance. Hannibal left a portion of his troops to guard the rear, understanding that a connection with Spain was vitally important. But the real trials began near the banks of the Rhone. Gallic tribes, incited by Roman agents, gathered on the opposite bank, preparing to throw the Carthaginians into the river. Here, Hannibal's tactical genius first became apparent. Instead of a frontal assault, which would have led to enormous losses, he secretly dispatched a cavalry detachment upstream to cross and attack the Gauls from behind. When the main forces began crossing in boats and rafts, the Gauls, confident in their superiority, suddenly heard battle cries from behind and saw smoke from their burning camps. Panic seized their ranks, and the crossing turned into a slaughter. The task of transporting the elephants was particularly challenging. Huge rafts were built for them, covered with earth so that the animals would think they were still on land. Some elephants, frightened by the water, jumped into the river, but, thanks to their trunks, which they used as breathing tubes, managed to reach the bank. However, ahead rose the Alps, white, cold, and silent guardians of Italy. It was late autumn, a time when the mountains become a deadly trap. Snow already covered the passes. Paths were narrow and slippery, and the local mountain tribes were hostile and cunning. The army stretched for kilometers, slowly crawling upwards like a huge snake. The cold penetrated to the bones. Men and animals plunged into abysses, finding their end there. The mountaineers set ambushes, dropping stones on the heads of passing columns, attacking stragglers and the wounded. Hannibal was everywhere. He encouraged the weary, organized defenses, personally conducted reconnaissance. Legend has it that when a huge rock blocked the path, he ordered large fires to be lit, the stone to be heated, and then doused with vinegar and wine. From the sharp temperature change, the rock cracked, and the soldiers were able to hack a passage with pickaxes. It was a triumph of will over matter, of reason over raw force. The descent from the mountains proved even more dangerous than the ascent. Ice, hidden under fresh snow, made every step risky. People slipped and fell. Horses broke their legs. But when the exhausted, thinned-out army finally descended into the Po River Valley, Italy opened before them. Of the 60,000 men who left Spain, barely half reached their destination. The losses were monstrous, but those who survived were transformed into an elite, into warriors capable of going through hell and returning. Hannibal's appearance in Italy was a bolt from the blue for Rome. The Senate frantically recalled legions, consuls hastily assembled new armies. No one could believe that the enemy, expected anywhere but here, was already at the gates. The first clash on the Ticinus River was merely a cavalry skirmish, but it demonstrated the superiority of the Numidian cavalry. The Roman consul Publius Cornelius Scipio was severely wounded and saved only by his young son, the future conqueror of Hannibal. This was an ominous sign for Rome. Then followed the Battle of Trebia. It was a cold December day with sleet falling. Hannibal provoked the Romans into an attack, forcing them to ford the icy river. The Roman legionaries, hungry and frozen, faced the well-fed and rested Carthaginians. When the Romans became embroiled in battle, a detachment under the command of Hannibal's brother Mago struck from an ambush. It was a classic blow to the rear, which led to the complete rout of the Roman army. Thousands of legionaries met their end in the waters of the Trebia or under the swords of the Carthaginians. But Hannibal did not stop. He moved south, through the swamps of Etruria, where his army again faced incredible difficulties. Soldiers marched waist-deep in water, unable to rest or sleep on dry land. Many suffered from diseases. Hannibal himself lost an eye due to inflammation, but continued to ride on the sole surviving elephant, leading his men forward. At Lake Trasimene, he orchestrated one of the most brilliant ambushes in history. The morning mist concealed his troops, positioned on the hills along the narrow road running along the lake's shore. The Roman army, under the command of Consul Gaius Flaminius, unaware of the danger, entered the defile. Suddenly, at the sound of a trumpet, the mist dispersed, and an avalanche of enemies descended upon the Romans. Trapped between the hills and the lake, the legionaries had no chance. It was not a battle, but an annihilation. Flaminius fell, and the water in the lake turned crimson. In 3 hours, 15,000 Romans met their end, and as many more were captured. Rome was in horror. The phrase, "Hannibal at the gates," became synonymous with imminent disaster. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, who chose a strategy of attrition against the enemy. He avoided major battles, following Hannibal's army closely, destroying provisions and attacking small detachments. This strategy, known as, quote, "one," was wise but unpopular. The Romans, accustomed to victories, craved a decisive battle, wanting to wash away the shame of defeat with the enemy's blood. Fabius was called a coward and a dilly-dallyer. When his dictatorship expired, the new consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, assembled the largest army Rome had ever seen, 87,000 men. They were confident that numerical superiority would guarantee victory. The encounter took place near Cannae, on the sun-scorched plain of Apulia. This place was supposed to become a tomb for the invading army, but instead became an eternal monument to Hannibal's tactical genius. He had almost half as many infantry as the Romans, but he had an advantage in cavalry. Hannibal arrayed his troops in a crescent shape, with the convex side facing the enemy. In the center, he placed the weaker Iberians and Gauls, and on the flanks, his elite African infantry. The Romans, forming deep columns, crashed into the Carthaginian center. Under the terrible pressure of the legions, the center began to bend, to retreat, but it did not break. The crescent curved in the opposite direction, turning into a bag. The Romans, tasting victory, rushed forward, drawing deeper and deeper into the trap. They crowded so tightly that they could not even raise their weapons. And then the trap snapped shut. The African infantry from the flanks turned and struck the sides of the Roman column. Simultaneously, Hannibal's heavy cavalry, having routed the Roman cavalry, struck from the rear. 80,000 men found themselves completely surrounded. The slaughter began. Dust, raised by thousands of feet, clogged eyes and lungs. Screams of terror drowned out the clang of metal. The sun beat down mercilessly. The Romans fought with the desperation of the doomed, but escape was impossible. On this day, on the field at Cannae, about 50,000 Roman soldiers, including Consul Aemilius Paulus, and 80 senators, met their end. It was an absolute triumph of the art of encirclement, a peak to which commanders of all subsequent eras aspired. After Cannae, it seemed that Rome was finished. Southern Italy went over to Hannibal's side. Capua, the second largest city, opened its gates to him. Maharbal, commander of the Numidian cavalry, told Hannibal, quote, "0." But Hannibal hesitated. He had no siege engines to take fortified Rome. His army was exhausted, and hopes for a rebellion of all of Rome's Italic allies were not fully realized. The Latin colonies remained loyal to the Republic. Hannibal waited for reinforcements from Carthage, but his native city, torn by political intrigues and envy of the Barcids' successes, was in no hurry to send aid. The aristocrats feared that the victorious commander would return and become a tyrant. They preferred to see him weakening in Italy than as a triumphator in Carthage. This was an internal conflict that undermined Hannibal's strength no less than the Roman legions. The loneliness of a genius misunderstood by his own people became increasingly palpable. He won battles, but lost the war of resources and logistics. Rome, however, showed superhuman tenacity. Instead of suing for peace, they forbade even uttering the word peace. They freed slaves to replenish the army, melted down jewelry for weapons. It was a total mobilization, a war of annihilation. The Romans realized that it was impossible to defeat Hannibal in open battle, so they decided to deprive him of his base by cutting off his supply lines. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the very youth who saved his father at Ticinus, stepped onto the stage. He was a worthy student of Hannibal, having studied his tactics down to the last detail. Scipio did not fight Hannibal in Italy. He went to Spain, to the very heart of the Barcids' possessions. With a daring assault, he captured New Carthage, depriving the Punic forces of their main base and silver mines. Then, after defeating the Carthaginian armies in Spain, he landed in Africa, creating a direct threat to Carthage itself. The circle closed. Hannibal, who had spent 15 years in Italy, suffering not a single major defeat, was forced to leave the land he had trodden for so long with his sandals to save his homeland. He wept as he left Italy, cursing not his enemies, but his countrymen, who had not given him the means for ultimate victory. The meeting of the two greatest commanders took place at Zama, near Carthage. They say that before the battle they met in person. Hannibal, gray-haired, weary from endless war, offered peace, warning Scipio of the fickleness of fortune. But Scipio, young and confident in Rome's strength, refused. The Battle of Zama became a mirror image of Cannae. Hannibal relied on his elephants, but Scipio devised an antidote. He left passages in the legion's formation into which the enraged animals rushed, causing no harm to the infantry. Roman trumpeters frightened the elephants with noise, forcing them to turn back and trample their own troops. This time, the Numidian cavalry fought on Rome's side. King Massinissa betrayed Carthage. At the decisive moment, the Roman and Numidian cavalry struck the rear of Hannibal's army. The veteran phalanxes, which had marched with him across the Alps and all of Italy, stood to the death, but were broken. Hannibal suffered his first and last defeat in a pitched battle. Carthage capitulated. The terms of peace were humiliating: loss of all overseas possessions, surrender of the fleet and elephants, and a colossal indemnity. Carthage ceased to be a great power. Hannibal, however, was not eliminated. He became suffete, the city's highest magistrate, and proved himself a talented administrator. He fought corruption, restored the economy, forcing the rich to pay taxes. The city began to revive, and this again frightened Rome. Senators demanded the extradition of their old enemy. Hannibal was forced to flee. Years of wandering began. He offered his services to Eastern kings, Antiochus, Prusias, attempting to create a new coalition against Rome. He was like a wounded lion, chased by hunters, given no moment of peace. The Romans could not sleep peacefully as long as Hannibal was alive. His name still inspired awe. His shadow loomed over the Republic. Eventually, he was cornered in Bithynia. Roman legionaries surrounded the house where he was hiding. Realizing that the exits were blocked, Hannibal took out the poison from his ring, which he always carried with him. "Let us finally relieve the Romans of the heavy burden, who consider it too long and tiresome to await the demise of a man they hate," he uttered his last words. Thus ended the journey of a man who made Rome tremble. He took the poison so as not to give his enemies the pleasure of seeing him in chains. But the paradox of history is that having lost the war, Hannibal won immortality. He became the standard for a military commander, a teacher for his enemies, and for all future conquerors. His crossing of the Alps remains a symbol of human audacity and the ability to overcome the insurmountable. His Battle of Cannae is studied in all military academies of the world as a perfect example of tactical art. He showed that one man, driven by an idea and will, can challenge a system and bring it to its knees. Rome defeated Carthage, wiped it off the face of the earth, salted its ruins, but could not erase the memory of Hannibal. Hannibal's legacy lives not in the stones of a destroyed city, but in the very essence of military art and the human spirit. He taught the world that strategy is more important than numbers, that intellect is sharper than a sword, and that even in defeat there can be greatness. His tragedy is the tragedy of a genius ahead of his time, a man who saw further than others, but was constrained by the limitations of his environment. He was a warrior who hated war, but could not live without it, because it was the essence of his oath. This oath of hatred, given by a 9-year-old boy at a fiery altar, turned into a flame that scorched history, leaving an indelible scar. Today, more than 2 millennia later, when we look at the map of Europe and Africa, we see not the borders of ancient empires, but Hannibal's path. We see the Alps he conquered, the rivers he crossed, and the fields he soaked in blood. His life reminds us that the greatest victories often turn into defeats, if they are not supported by a solid foundation of political will and public support. Hannibal showed that tactical genius is powerless against strategic resilience and national unity. Rome won not because it had the best generals, before Scipio they didn't, but because Roman society was a monolith, capable of enduring any blows and recovering. Carthage, on the other hand, was a trading corporation where profit was placed above patriotism. Hannibal's final chord of life sounds not like a funeral march, but like a triumphant anthem to an indomitable will. His ghost still wanders the corridors of history, reminding us that true strength is not only muscles and weapons, but also a spirit that refuses to surrender even in the face of an inevitable end. And every time someone challenges a seemingly invincible force, when a minority stands against the majority, when intellect fights against brute mass, in this confrontation, one hears the echo of the steps of the Carthaginian leopard, walking through the snows of the Alps to meet his destiny. The circle is closed, the oath fulfilled. He did not become a friend to Rome. He became its eternal nightmare, its teacher, and its greatest legend, outliving Rome itself and Carthage and the gods to whom he offered sacrifices. In this eternal memory lies his ultimate victory, a victory over time and oblivion, which neither Scipio's legions nor the poison in his ring nor the betrayal of his own fellow citizens could take from him.